So on to the small developers now. What's actually going on in the art sort of gaming scene now? Or is there one? How's it growing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that's happening. You know, on the one hand, if you look at least in the U.S., you know, independent cinema is fairly widely distributed. People know about it. People know the names of directors who make very low budget, no budget films, and gaming doesn't have the same setup. There's not independent gaming, sort of as prominent, as well known, as widespread. But I think some changes are afoot, and there's people like Jason Warrer, Jonathan Blow, Mark Essen, in addition to a lot of people in the interactive fiction community who are creating really interesting pieces. Other communities doing graphical adventure games, people participating in different competitions online. So there's actually a remarkable amount of new activity. But I think we have a ways to go before we have, as rich a culture of individuals producing games as we have, things like punk bands or, independent filmmakers, things like that. So there's still the idea people have of gaming is still that it's a big company, huge development teams, large amount of assets, and going on to consoles getting distributed in that way.
Do you think that's beginning to change with big flash kind of portal game sites, as well as new platforms, the iPhone and the iPad now with that larger scale opportunities?
Yeah. It is. I think that there's a lot of possibilities that are opened up by teenagers having pirated copies of Flash on which they do these radical, really innovative projects that are different from the art games, that are different from what people are doing in interactive fiction. At the same time, when people look at that stuff, they're always pretty quick to think, oh yeah, but that's not really a video game. That's that's something some people did for fun. So that activity is happening, and I look to those types of productions, to see what interesting stuff is going on. But I think there's still more work to be done to expand people's thinking as to what video gaming can be. That this is as valid a way of participating in this culture and producing interesting work along these lines, as are the big corporate projects.
One of the things I've noticed is the emergence of Asian developers, particularly Chinese developers, appearing on the iPhone. Do you think that there's an emerging untapped Asian development that's non-sort of Japanese that will emerge on these platforms potentially?
So I know very little about that phenomenon, specifically not being an iPhone user but having an Android phone. And this is, this is just consistent with my, being a Mac user, which is even more perverse, right, in the area of video gaming. But you look at things like shmups. There's a tremendous tradition, very strong tradition of Japanese development of shoot 'em up games that are produced by individuals and are really interesting, radical projects. So, yeah, that stuff is happening there, and it wouldn't surprise me if it breaks forth in other areas also.
What was your favorite arcade game in the 80s? Totally changing this subject.
Let's see. Trying to think of games that I really liked. Of course, it's so looking back. There's this really level playing field of you can get everything on MAME, but you're very constrained to what was around geographically. I'd say one of my favorites, because it just had such interesting textures of different levels and different opponents and things like this, and it involved kicking ass, was Yayar Kung Fu, actually.
Super cool. Do you remember one of the Laserdisc games called Thayer's Quest?
Yes. Where did you pull that out of?
Oh, one of my friends is a great Laserdisc collector, and he's that interactive fiction in the arcade.
Yeah, they had it in the gold mine in San Antonio, Texas, and I very seldom find people who know about that, and I did not get very far into that game, but. What a strange, radical project. There were also these Laserdisc games like Cliffhanger, which repurposed animation that was already done. there was a lot of that you know, here at the museum. There's Dragon's Lair. People know about Space Ace and so on. But yeah, it's interesting to hear about these things and realize that there are these categories of game that you know, where did they go? Why don't we remember about you know, what was up with those? And I guess, you know, that there are also things that manifest themselves on some of the failed you know, like multimedia CD-ROM platforms that came later.
Thanks a lot, Nick.